Okay, welcome back. This is the second lesson in rhetorical criticism, focusing on our understanding of criticism. We'll unpack rhetoric shortly, but criticism is what we're focused on right now. Just a quick reminder about our first lesson, where we basically set out to define criticism, and we ended up with this definition. Criticism is a process of making reasoned judgments. That's where we decided criticism would mean. And then we went on, we looked at that, we said our reasoning would be guided by our method, which is simply a disciplined set of instructions for how to examine an artifact or a rhetorical text. That method would result in understanding, the parts and the pieces and how they fit together and flowed. That method basically gave us how the parts and pieces are systematically designed to work in order to move somebody. And we also touched briefly on the idea of theory. We said theory would be guiding our judgment, right? So those are the areas that we touched on in the first lesson, and now we're moving on to the areas of criticism itself. So basically we're ready at this point to turn our attention to a bigger picture, get a sense of the context of criticism, and look at the areas where criticism happens. We're going to start with the clearest division that creates the two largest arenas of criticism. And we're going to talk about both of those arenas, but we're obviously going to pick the one that our discipline falls into, and we'll look at that one in more detail. We will subdivide it over and over until we basically come to the context where our realm of criticism takes place inside of communication studies. So the sweep of human knowledge and criticism, if you want to go meta, is divided into two arenas, which we call the arts and the sciences. The arts are sometimes called the humanities or the arts and letters, but the major division here is what these two arenas focus on. The arts and humanities explore the human experience of the world, while that other arena, the sciences, explores the natural elements that make up the world. So in a nutshell, the sciences are about describing nature, and the arts, the humanities, they're about grappling with the human experience within nature. And perhaps beyond nature when you get to questions of philosophy and religion, right? But we're going to start by looking at the sciences. Science is divided into dozens, scores, hundreds of subfields. There's chemistry and biology and physics and botany and astronomy and geology. There's organic chemistry and microbiology and astrophysics and more and more and more, on and on and on. But all of those subdivisions are actually remarkably similar in what they do. And that's one of the marks of science. They have the same general focus, the same general goal, and certainly the same general method. As a whole, the scope of sciences is focused on, if we're just going to, nutshell it, to just sort of put it all together in one statement, basically the sciences are interested in quantitative, measurable aspects that describe natural phenomena. So what a scientist is doing is describing what happens in nature. That's what they are out to do. They want to make very detailed, very precise descriptions of nature and the phenomena that take place inside of nature. The scientist is looking for an absolute complete uniformity of judgment about material knowledge under very limited, very specified, reproducible conditions. They're looking for identical conclusions under identical conditions. That's what they want. They want indisputable measures of indisputable phenomena. That's the sort of idealized outcome. So in other words, the scientist expects exactly the same result every time you do exactly the same thing. And they depend on that very reliable, very orderly, very systematic, very predictable sameness as part of their way of exploring and describing nature. And when that doesn't happen, when they do the same thing and they get some unexpected or different results, that they're taken aback, right? They're driven back to the drawing board to try and figure out what went wrong here. How did this result happen this time? What was new? What was different? What was strange here? Now, because the outcomes of science are so reliable, so consistent, science ends up with a very powerful ability. Basically, science can predict the future. Okay, science can tell me that if I put if I put the same acidic fertilizer on my blueberries and my raspberries, the raspberries will die. Okay, that is, science knows what will happen in the future if I do or if I fail to do certain things, and that's extremely powerful stuff. We like that. We love science. Science is why we've broken the famine cycle. Science is why we can give people 3 or 4 days warning before a hurricane hits their coast. Medical science is why some of us are still alive, right? Science is exceptionally powerful. So we see that science is focused on describing and explaining the world of nature. And we see that the goal of science is to make these descriptions in such a way that you can reproduce them over and over again, so that you get identical results under identical conditions. Because that is what gives us the ability to say, we know this. And knowledge, knowing this about nature, that's what allows us to make very, very good predictions about the future. Now, science can do all of this because science has, a magical method. It's almost magical. The method in science is unified, meaning there is only one. It is universalized. It applies to all aspects of nature. It's accumulative. So once we establish something in science and we say, this is proven, this is known, I don't have to, if I'm a scientist, I don't have to go back and reduplicate that experiment before I can build on it and move forward. I can just take what has been established and I can go forward. So I don't have to go back and redo Copernicus's calculations about the cosmos if I'm an astrophysicist. I can say, hey, we know that's been established. I don't have to start there. I can start from there and move ahead and move forward. So science is cumulative, and that is incredibly powerful. But the most powerful thing, science is self-correcting. The method of science is self-correcting. If you get it wrong and you just keep doing it, the method will fix what you did wrong. It's the single most important aspect of the scientific method. It's that it's self-correcting. If you forget to carry a 2, or you got your measurement wrong in some way in the process of doing your science, then all you have to do to fix your mistake is to keep doing the science. The scientific method will fix your mistakes if you just follow the scientific method precisely. The scientific method will show you where you went wrong, and it will give you some insight and help you explain how you went astray, okay? Now, that's remarkable. That's shocking. That's amazing. And we can raise the question, okay, so where did this come from? Where did we get such an amazing method? So very, very quickly, let's start with a guy named Ibn al-Hazin. In about 1021 on the European calendar, what he did is he introduced this basic idea that observation is the fundamental principle of knowledge, and observation had to be correct in order to get good knowledge. Okay, now, and we usually trace the foundations of science back. I mean, some people try to push it all the way back to Aristotle, but Aristotle was much more interested in building a beautiful, coherent system than he was in building a very reliable, observant system. This is the first character that we run into that says, hey, you do the observations, and you just look very, very carefully, and the looking will tell you what's important and what's not here. So that happens about 1021 on the European calendar, and we sort of hover there for a couple of centuries, and then along about the 1260s, there's a sudden rush by a series of people who pick up this idea of observation, and they begin to emphasize that it's not just observation, but it's repetition of observation. That's how you establish what we could say we have knowledge of. So repeat and repeat and repeat your observations. Look again, look again, look again. Keep it simple. Describe what's really there, William of Ockham says. That same period, you run into a guy named Roger Bacon, who really, really moves the process forward. You get a guy named Duns Scotus, also championing the idea that observation is the source of what we can say we have knowledge of. So all this is happening in about the 1260s. And that begins to move us forward again. Wow, we're then sort of in another orbit for about 350 years or so before we get another character who shows up on the scene. Francis Bacon, not to be confused with our friend Roger Bacon, again, about 1620 or so now. And basically, he writes a big book called the Novum Organum. And he wants this to replace Aristotle's idea of organizing knowledge. That's his plan. He's very self-conscious about it. And he is the first person who really formalizes this idea that when you repeat your experiments, you have to be very careful in the way your that when you repeat your observations, you have to be very careful in the way you make your observations. In fact, you can control aspects of what you're observing to narrow down the variables. And that, of course, sets the stage for the final step we have in the scientific method. Sir Isaac Newton, in 1686, he writes a big book called Principia Mathematica, in which he lays down what he calls the 4 rules of reasoning, which finalized and laid the foundation for the modern scientific method with its steps of hypothesis and observation, experimentation, revision, and all that. So those are some of the most significant contributors to the history that developed that extraordinary method, that one method that applies to every field and subfield of the sciences, the one universal, accumulative, self-correcting method. It's unparalleled in human history. It's amazing, okay? We have to give science credit. We have to tip our hat to them because it is the only area of human experience, human knowledge, human reflection that has ever developed a self-correcting method. So that's spectacular. And it's powerful. It's why we have cell phones. It's why we have been to the moon. It's why we are able to make predictions about weather and all the wonderful things that we get out of science. Now, while science is capable of making these incredibly powerful reasoned judgments that amaze us, there is always a kind of a balanced ledger in the cosmos. And if you have a method that's that powerful, you can bet you're going to pay some kind of high price for that kind of power. And indeed you do, because that scientific method, as powerful as it is in making these reasoned judgments, in the end, it can only make those judgments about 2 things. And only 2 things: composition and reaction. In other words, the world of science can tell you what something is made of, and it can tell you what happens when you hit it really hard with a big wooden mallet. But that's it. Now, as we've seen, we can do amazing things with the answers to those 2 questions. We get penicillin, we get refrigerators, we get CAT scans and airplanes and cell phones and the whole 9 yards. All of that is extraordinarily impressive. The scientific method of looking at the world does amazing things, and we are not trying to take anything away from science. But in the end, science only offers critical judgments about those 2 questions: composition and reaction. And those 2 questions, those of us in the humanities would say, miss a lot about what is going on in our human experiences within this amazing world that science is doing such a great job exploring and describing and telling us about. And that stuff that is just outside of science's reach will, of course, bring us to that second major division in the world of criticism. And that second division, as we've seen, we have the sciences on one side, and we have on the other side the arts and the humanities. The arts differ from the sciences in that they set out to represent, to represent, to present again, qualitative aspects of uniquely human experiences, where, in contrast, science set out to provide quantitative descriptions of phenomena in nature. The arts try to be a sort of psychic mirror that we can hold up and see ourselves in, so that we have some representation of our own unique human thoughts, ideas, moments in this world. The goal of the arts is revelation. It's to show us something unique about ourselves. And that too, remember, differs from the sciences, which seek to provide insight about some objective process or object in nature. The scientific method also, we said, remember, was self-correcting. That's its secret power. But the arts are absolutely not. All you have to do in science is follow the method. But in the arts, whether or not we accomplish our goal, that goal of seeing, of representing some human experience, and understanding that more deeply, whether or not we accomplish that goal will, quite frankly, depend on how good you are as a critic in understanding and exploring, and also how good the artist was who produced that artifact that you're looking at. So we have no guarantees here. This is not math. You can't add 2 and 2 and get 4 every single time. You're going to add 2 and 2 and get 22 sometimes. And at other times, you're going to add 2 and 2 and get 327. It's a different kind of criticism. So the methods in the arts are also radically different from the method in science in all the other ways too. Okay, the method of science is unified. There's one method. Methods in the arts are diversified. There are many methods. The method in science is universalized, meaning it applies to every subdiscipline in the sciences and every phenomena that science sets out to describe. That's simply not true in the arts. Again, we have no method that works in every circumstance. We have rather a diversity of methods. It's like a tool box, and we reach in and pull out the tool, the method we think will work best to accomplish the tool of understanding this particular artifact. And in addition, these representations in the arts are, unlike the actions of a scientist in a laboratory, they're non-accumulative. In other words, the experiences of joy or of suffering that are felt by one artist, those experiences result in that artist's expression, their own representation of their human experience in some painting or poem, for example. But the next artist that comes along, they can't build on the previous artist's experiences. The next artist has to go out and they've got to discover their own joy. They've got to have their own pain and loss. And then they have to represent their own experience. They can't build on the previous artistic achievements. So these artistic representations, the poem, the painting, whatever, are then subjected to criticism under a diversified, there are many of them, but defined. They're scripted, they're guided, they're not intuition or gut level feelings, as we've seen. So criticism here is happening under a diversified but defined, disciplined set of methods that are appropriate to the artistic arena under criticism. So the result of this criticism varies according to the method that we choose, the theory undergirding that method, the skills of the critic, and the skills of the artist. Now, the areas of the arts are subdivided. Now, remember, we started out saying there are 2 huge areas in which criticism, reason, judgment takes place in humanity: sciences and arts. We're now looking at the arts, and we are subdividing the arts themselves. They break down into 2 basic categories, what we call the plastic arts and what we call the performing arts. The plastic arts and the performing arts. In the plastic arts, you end up, as an artist, you end up making some thing, an objet d'art it's called, an artistic thingy. You end up with a thingy when you're done. That's what you set out to do. You can think of the arts, the plastic arts, as roughly sculpture and painting and architecture, maybe photography. The visual arts is another way we sometimes characterize them. You make or compose that artistic thingy out of some material. And the way you work is to alter the color, the texture, the placement, the shape of that material you're working with. And you alter it in a way to create an impact. that is designed to say something about human experiences, human hopes, human ideals, and dreams. We say at one level that the compositional material, whatever it is you're working with, is transubstantiated or transformed. What we're saying is that the material you're working with actually changes at some psychological level. So, for example, if I'm standing in front of this sculpture, which is Michelangelo's Pieta, right? And if I'm standing there looking at that and somebody comes up and stands beside me and looks at that and goes, whoa, what is that? And if I turn to that person and I say, well, it's a rock. Okay, hold on. I seem to have failed to see what this is. I seem to have missed the very essence of the thing. The rock is in my head, not up there in front of us, right? So I have a stone head and a heart of cement. Now, I am correct at one level. Understand, I am correct. The material composition is in fact stone. The Pieta is carved out of marble. So yeah, sure, it's a rock. Okay, it's stone. But having said that, I have mistakenly assumed that what a thing is made out of can be taken to define what that thing actually is. And that's a place where the arts are distinguished from the sciences. Basically, in the arts, we hold that the compositional material does not reveal the essence of the artifact itself. Okay, the stuff it's made out of is valuable and important, and that's great, but it's not what's actually here. What is actually here, that stone has been changed by the artist. It has become, in the hands of the artist, something greater than the mere material it's made out of. Okay, so though it's made out of marble, the Pieta is not a piece of marble. Okay, the artist, Michelangelo, has transfigured mere geology, and he's changed a piece of rock into this statement, this sublime statement about human suffering and loss and pain and love. Now, set against the plastic arts, which do all of this, we have what's known as the performing arts, second major division inside the arts. The performing arts where we want to give our attention next. Okay, so the performing arts do not produce an artistic thingy for you to look at. That's not what they do. They're about something else. The performing arts are those arts which express their representation of human experience, not through an object, but through motion, through change, rather than this fixed object. So the performing arts operate as a dynamic event rather than a static artistic object. They will combine elements of the oral, what you hear, and the verbal arts. Frequently they do that by putting together a story or a drama. You're looking here, the picture you see here is a film version of the play of Macbeth. And if you haven't seen that version, go see it, especially around Halloween. It'll scare you the daylights out of you. Okay? They combine these elements and they create an event in order to represent some aspect of human life, in order to create an artistic statement or an encouragement to move the human being, the human heart, mind, will in one direction or another. So when you think of the performing arts, you can think of things like dance and drama, theater, poetry, movies, concerts, novels, to some degree, sort of, television, Netflix. All these provide you with an experience about human life rather than a thing to look at and contemplate. And it's that experience that marks the performing arts. Now, the performing arts are sometimes subdivided into the oral arts, the arts that we hear, and the verbal arts. Although here the divisions and subdivisions start getting a little messy. There's a lot of overlap. For example, the oral arts are those of music. Music relies on alterations of pitch, tone, volume, cadence, rhythm, in order to create an impact and move the human mind, the human thought, the human feelings, human emotions in one direction or another. But at the same time, the human voice is considered the primary, the most fundamental, most versatile, most valuable of the musical instruments, and singing is usually put into the musical arts, despite the fact that it's got verbal content, right? So it gets a little messy here. But we can still think in terms of the musical and the spoken to a large degree. Verbal arts are those of speech, the language arts. And their primary medium for recreating, for representing human experience is words. Words are their medium. Words are what a language artist crafts in the same way that a painter crafts color and a sculptor crafts stone. So in the verbal arts, we think of poetry, novels, speeches, movies to a large degree. These are all largely, mostly verbal arts. The verbal artist is called a rhetorician. Now, confusingly, rhetorician are also used to describe not only the artists and what they create, but also the critics, like us, who study those creations. So I am a rhetorician. That means I study rhetoric. It doesn't necessarily mean I produce it, okay? So I'm not writing great poetry. I'm a critic of rhetoric. But oddly, the same word gets used for all of those. So that may be a little confusing, but we'll unpack that in a little bit later. But when we get finally to verbal arts, we're getting somewhere, okay? This is a course in rhetorical criticism, so obviously we're going to end up focusing mostly on this area. The oral arts, the world of rhetoric, is mostly here. Now, it doesn't follow that the world of rhetoric is exclusively about the words used. Of course not. Tones, music, colors, space, all those go into that rhetorical experience, as we're going to find out. But we start focusing on the verbal. And we're going to learn how to go through the process of making reasoned judgments about rhetorical artistry. So in the language arts, including rhetoric, we generally pass reasoned judgments in two separate spheres, in content and in presentation. What is here? How was it presented? Now, as we've seen, method guides us in making our reasoned judgments. And that is going to bring us to that third and final segment of this review of criticism, where we're going to begin to look at how rhetorical criticism is situated in the field of communication studies as a whole and how we function and do rhetorical criticism. So that'll be coming up in our third installment.